we are God, we are love, we are source consciousness that has the separation is an illusion, that we are not separate from that. But we come here and we break off from that and we forget to have this experience so we can evolve. And I really think that we are God, source, the divine, whatever word you would like to use, evolving by understanding itself through us. Hello, this is Melissa LeGette, and you're listening to Your Superior Self.
Melissa, this is going to be a treat, right? So I had a session with you, past life session, and I have to say that you have some incredible abilities, crazy powers, off the charts, like probably one of the most memorable experiences that I've had thus far with metaphysics, right?
Thank
How
you.
did this come to be, right? Like, because we talked a little bit about this before, right? Like, this is way out of left field for you, or where you used to be.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure if people listen to this that knew me even like 3, 4 years ago, they would not believe what I would be doing right now. So growing up, I was just an atheist. I actually declared to my parents at the age of like 10 that I'm an atheist. God isn't for me. Religion's not for me. And they were kind of taken aback because we weren't a religious family. They were like, okay, we don't really go to church. Where's this coming from? And that was just really defined me. I loved science. And then when I was about 23, I went through what I now call and know to be one of the dark nights of the soul. So a relationship that I was in for 4 years, my first deep love, ended. And then within a year period, I lost my uncle, and I was actually in the hospital holding my mother and his wife when he died. And
Mm.
then 8 months after that, one of my best friends was killed in a car accident. And I remember hearing the saying that like nobody is an atheist in the foxhole. And I was just like, no, that's not true, because I was like sticking to my beliefs with that, like there's nothing after this. But I was also just like, I was working full time, going to graduate school at night full time, and I was not allowing myself any space for it to really hit me. And then about a year after my friend's death, I saw something about a young child who remembered a past life of his, and it just really captured my interest. And I started reading the work of Dr. Ian Stevenson. He worked at the University of Virginia, and he has thousands and thousands of case studies in children who remember their past lives. And that kind of woke me up to, okay, well, there's more. Like obviously, like this is scientifically proven. There's more. And then I came across the work of Dr. Brian Weiss, who is a clinical psychologist. He actually might be a psychiatrist, but he started doing past life regressions with his patients and had just amazing, applicable results. And he has published many books on it. He's done a lot of talks on the topic. So it was really just my entryway into this was I was kind of still holding on to like, well, it's based in science. I can see the science. And then when I met my husband, my heart opened a little bit more. And then it was really when I became a mother. When I knew I wanted to become pregnant, I wanted to start connecting with my intuition, with my feminine. And I started reading tarot as a way to just start to trust myself. And my daughter was born. I was still reading tarot. I started reading tarot for friends and family. And then I was just like, okay, let's see what happens if I just go all in with this. And I went all in, and here we are.
Mm. Yeah. You did a chakra scan for me, which I've never had before, but it was very powerful, and it's helped me thus far, like clear some of those issues that we discussed in our session. How did you come to start utilizing that in your practice?
So when I read the chakras, I've read about that in a few text. I believe the first time I read about that was in this book called Spiritual Fertility. That was one of the books I read when I was on the path to become a mother. And then that method was shown to me in, I took like a little course on kind of how to deepen your focus when you're doing readings. But my unique approach to this chakra scan is when I'm doing a reading, the chakra scan is the energy you hold on your body, but I'm also very much in conversation with your soul. So your higher self, your soul, sometimes people's divine guidance, people call them spirit guides, they come in. And what I find in my chakra scans is we're often holding blocks that are occurring because of our physical world, like our programming that we picked up on. But a lot of times these blocks can go deeper. And I'm finding that a lot of times we're carrying either ancestral trauma, ancestral patterning, and then also imprints from past lives that we're balancing out the karma of those in this lifetime.
Mm. I was listening to something yesterday, no, today when I was out running, and it was something about another chakra. Some lady had this extreme experience in India with Mother Mary, and there was like another chakra that's associated with the womb and motherhood. And I feel like in your case, right, like motherhood really strengthened your abilities, right? Like, or brought them to the forefront and kind of, I want to say, shook you out of that sleep that we tend to reside in when we live in this Western society. Like we're blind to energy, the subtle energies that the body produces. We're asleep to a lot of different things, right? Like, but I feel like motherhood really awakened you in that sense of like coming into your own power, right?
Yes. So with motherhood, I felt and witnessed the power of the feminine. And like most women in our society, I had been functioning mainly in my masculine for a very long time because that is our blueprint that we're given for how to succeed. And with the feminine comes, when you can truly embody the feminine, there's a slowness to that. And there's just the connection you have with your body and your intuition. That's what strengthens so much for me. And that is how I was able to get back in touch with these gifts that I can look back into my childhood now and I can really see how I had them. So when I was a very young kid, I used to love going to bed at night and having this quiet time. And I would just lay in my bed and what I see it now is I think I was like astral traveling or I was in like these other worlds. And I just thought it was my imagination because that's what I was being told. I guess I like said something to someone at one time. They told me I was just very imaginative. But I had these gifts as a very young girl that I, at some point, felt it wasn't safe to show that side of me. I wouldn't be accepted in school. I wouldn't be accepted by my peers. So I shut all of that off. And then, in order to achieve and find success, I really fully stepped into that masculine energy. And I was just going all the time. I was glorifying being busy. And it wasn't until I was able to slow down and get in tune with that feminine part of myself and that quiet and that still that I could really get back in touch with these.
Mm. How did you build that trust, right?
Oh, so I actually was just going through old journals of mine and I just have like affirmations of like, I trust, I flow, I trust in divine timing. And it was just something that I continually had to affirm and become consciously aware of when I wasn't trusting and when I was holding on tightly to programming or my story about something. And it was just about a 4-year path of just getting to this point. And what really changed the game for me with being able to trust these gifts was I actually had a deep, deep past life wound that was keeping me in fear of being seen. So one of my dear and most beloved friends, we came into each other's lives in this incarnation in over the summer, but we have actually had many, many past lives together. And we had this life together where we were we worked in the land. We could probably call us witches, but we had just worked the land, we worked with herbs, and we had this knowledge that our families have had for thousands and thousands of years. And this was a time where the church and the nobility were taking over the land. So we became serfs. And what we were doing, we were working very quietly under the radar, and we were found out. And they killed my friend in that life, and they kept me alive to like kind of just spread the message, like, don't do this work, no good
Mhm.
things will come of it. And all of that knowledge and skill died with us. And many, many people that are in this field, they have those witch wounds. I call it the wizard wound if it's a man, but
I
I don't know
definitely have the
anyone
wizard
that.
wound. Yeah, I
Yes.
definitely have that. What do you think that like imposter syndrome is a deeply rooted in like a past life trauma?
Oh, I'm sure it absolutely can be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also, it can be low self-worth. So what I find so interesting about this work is the energetics of how our souls kind of choose like who we're going to be in these incarnations to balance out the wounds of the soul, but they also do that in many ways by choosing the parents, the family, the society that you're going to be born into, because it's balancing the karma of the past lives through the opportunity of the healing you need to do in the human incarnation. So a lot of times I find, like for women that are carrying the mother wound, like a lot of just mother-daughter trauma that goes way back, their soul chose that family to heal that wound for the family, for the generational line, like generations back, generations to come, but also to balance it for the soul.
Hmm. I love that, right? So how long does it take, right? Like, I mean, do you just keep reincarnating, right, and having this trauma? Like, when do you become conscious of this trauma, and then how do you heal it? Does it take working with spirit workers or spirit or light workers like yourself to finally realize that? I mean, I feel like we can go generations and be blind to this, right?
Oh, absolutely. And there's really, you also have to acknowledge just where souls are in their evolution. Um, some souls aren't at the point where they want to be talking about past lives and looking into past life trauma. They need to learn other lessons. Um, Ainsley McLeod, he actually writes a lot about this. He writes like he kind of puts souls in a level in levels, like 1 through 10, which is very helpful for me to
Mm.
conceptualize. But you do this as many times as you need. And it's funny because I feel like I'm getting quite up there in my soul's evolution. I'm getting like tired. I'm like, I don't really want to do this again. Like, this is exhausting. And I kind of feel like that's a sign when you're like nearing, and I don't even know if it's the end. I think you just, because the way I see it with guides that I work with sometimes, so a lot of us have spirit guides that at some point incarnated with us in a human incarnation where they were actually a mother or a matriarch or somebody who just guided you in that way, but they've stopped incarnating as humans and they're now just guiding you as a higher evolved soul. So I think that's the way I see it, is you're evolving past needing to incarnate as a human, and then you can go and do other things.
So fun. Now, when you communicate with the guides, right, is it through pictures, signs, or like actual like language?
It is all of those. I get a lot of, so some guides, in some readings, some guides do more pictures. So when I do a reading, I have, I usually work with, I have a guide that kind of holds the, like the safe container for me, and then I'm connecting with my higher self. And my client, I'm trying to connect with their higher self, but sometimes a guide will come in. And if their guide's giving me a lot of pictures or metaphors I'm not understanding, I then have my guide translate that for me. So I can hear my guides very clearly. And it's usually like the other guides that I'm getting something. If it's like a message that I'm not completely understanding, that's when I pull my guides in to clarify. For example, I had one client where for the first time I just smelled something. Like I had my hand like this and I just started smelling food on my hand. And I was like, I don't understand what this is. And then my guide was like, oh, it's because it has something to do with her wanting to be a chef or a food writer. So
Hmm.
I had my guide step in and clarify. But I I'd say my strongest suit is visuals and then hearing my guides, but then other things. And then I guess just knowing that claircognizance
So you
sometimes.
hear a voice and that's your guide.
Mhm.
So when we did our session, like what did you see? Did you see my guides or your guide?
So for you, I saw your guide because he was the one that showed me. Do you mind if I speak to
Yeah,
what I
let's go. Yeah.
So your guide was showing me that he had presented as a warrior and then he was changing to a monk. And he was just showing me those visuals. And in order to get the message clear, my guide stepped in and explained what was happening.
That's so interesting.
Mhm.
And that works for all your clients or like most of them?
Yeah. And I actually get like I write when I'm doing these meditations for my clients, and the messages come through when I'm writing. And sometimes I'll kind of start channeling through my writing. And I like my handwriting changes, my vision goes blurry. And that's definitely when I'm connected with a guide that I'm channeling through.
Hmm. Do you do protection at all? Like, do you think
Oh,
that we, yeah.
I protected this podcast. I
Oh, well,
protect.
thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
And
Uh,
it's actually, I used to live in the city. I used to live downtown, and now I can't even go downtown without having to put a lot of protection up around me because I'm just very sensitive to other energies. I can pick up on a lot of what's just around me, and in the city, in that dense environment, that's hard for me to be in now.
did they tell you that, or is that just because you're sensitive?
I think I'm just sensitive, and I think I was just not listening to my body before. I was just kind of always going. And it, again, like once I tapped into this, I think those sensitivities heightened.
Mhm.
There's just a different way of like needing to exist now.
So let me ask you this, right? Like, how is this new spiritual work has impacted your like relationship with your husband, right? Like, does he get like cool advice and like free guidance and stuff like that as far as like career decisions and or like life, huge life decisions?
He can when he comes to me for that. But it's actually funny you ask that because a lot of my work is also when I really leaned into embodying the feminine, I started really understanding how the masculine and feminine energies are out of balance, how they come into harmony, and how you can really work within them to like strengthen how they unite and how they can help each other. And I've been consciously treating my husband in a way that's just activating that masculine energy in him. And part of that is just deeply honoring his attention and really just kind of like breathing love into whatever he's doing. So when he comes to me with like asking me for a question or for advice, I most of the time say like, I trust you. I know you know how to do this. I know you know how to lead. And before then, it's so funny because he's been an entrepreneur for decades, and like he would talk to me about problems at work and I would just be like, well, you should do this. Like, who do I don't know what to do. But I've stopped doing that, and I really just kind of speak into like, I trust you to lead. You're the one that's supposed to be leading this company. But if he were to say, can you look into this for me, I would. And I've like set up protections around his company. So
That's
I'm very much
interesting.
available for that. But
So when you put protection around like this podcast, right? Like, what is that doing? Is that just bringing in positive energy, healing energy? Like, what is that?
I would, yeah. And it's also, it was a protection and a prayer of just like keeping the vibration of this podcast in the highest and greatest good. And then also that it is going to be available to the ears that are meant to hear it.
Mm, I love that. Um, mm, I just love that, right? Like, yeah, I feel like we speak to these topics, and it lands on the ears that need to hear it the most, right? And then you resonate with that message, and that pushes you in a different direction. Like it happens to me all the time, right? Like I'll listen to something, not knowing that it's time for me to listen to that,
Mhm.
right? And then it'll push me in a different direction to kind of explore a certain book or a teacher or a teaching, and it
Mhm.
opens my mind to something totally different, right? So people listening to this who haven't heard of past lives, right, might say, you know what, Melissa, you know, Melissa inspired me to go pick up Brian Weiss's book, right? And they might start traveling down that path, and then it leads into something else, and then it leads into something else. Like I started with past lives. Like that's to your point, right? There's a lot of research on it.
Mhm.
Dr. Weiss is a very respected man in his field, and University of Virginia is a huge university doing studies on reincarnation, right? Like I never knew that before, and I was like blown away that they actually have a department doing this.
Yeah.
And some of the scientific literature on that is amazing, right?
Mhm.
Um, so and then I met you, and then we do one, right, past life kind of healing session, kind of bringing to my consciousness what I need to work on, and like totally resonate with. Like I still listen to the track today just to kind of help remind me what I need to work on, and like I can see changes already in my life, right? Like the warrior monk like idea, like oh my god, like I was just like blown away. I was like, yes, right, like totally see it in my life.
Yes, absolutely. And what's beautiful about past life healings are it's very easy for your soul to recognize like that is not the lesson I'm learning in this lifetime. And it can just kind of put it to rest. Like the healing I was talking about before with that witch wound I carried. As soon as I released that, I was a different person the next day. And the same thing with my friend. We both had this fear, this deep fear of being seen in this work. I wouldn't do readings for anyone unless you were my friend or family. Like did not feel safe at all being seen. And
Mhm.
here I am now talking about this on a podcast with no fear in my body whatsoever.
You're not nervous even a little bit that somebody's going to listen to this?
Well, honestly, I I feel like I know the judgments. Like I've been on that side. I would have been that person who thought I was a wackadoo. And
Yes, ma'am. I was there with you, and I
yeah,
was throwing stones, and here I am hosting a podcast about spirituality and consciousness.
and when you know that part of yourself and you can give love and integrate with that part of yourself, when that's thrown at you and from another, it doesn't hurt you. The
Mhm.
power is gone from that. I
Mhm.
know my message doesn't resonate with everyone, but it does for those who it's meant to, and for those that I believe I can help or shine light on their path.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you have those witch powers, right, from back in the day.
I do. Actually, that's one of the ways that I really this work started coming together for me and how I was in meditation was I had a new guide that just kind of stepped in, and she was an Egyptian high priestess.
Ooh,
And every time I went into meditation, she would kind of, in my mind's eye, she would put her forehead against mine, and that was the first time I could actually hear what somebody was saying to me was through that guide. And one time she like leaned in to put her forehead against mine, and she just fully stepped into me. And I just like had chills all over my body. And I just knew that that guide was actually me in a past life in Egypt. And I just knew how to do all of these things. Like I remember the first few sessions I had for that, my clients would be like, "How do you know this?" And I was like, "I don't know. I think I was an Egyptian high priestess once, and I'm remembering all that now."
wow.
Yeah.
Um, where do you want to go, right? Like, what do you want to do with this work?
That's a very good question. I I want to I love working with clients. I have an initial session, which is usually like the reading that you got, and then I do a lot of like follow-up coaching with them. Right now, that is what my focus is and where my heart is. But eventually, I do want to be able to reach a broader audience, which is just hard to do when you're focused on one-on-one. I'm very called to like healing the sister wound and the witch wound in women. And I'm also very healed to my work with men. I believe that by embodying the divine feminine, like I do in my sessions, when I work with men, what I'm doing is I'm holding this vibration where I am seeing the divine masculine in them. And that energy, because it's held, I can then kind of see the programming and the blocks and the things that are getting in the way of that divine masculine, that healed masculine taking hold within them. And right now, our society is experiencing this rise of the divine feminine consciousness. And what I've seen through my work and the energetics of my work is that in order for that rising divine feminine consciousness to actually take hold, it needs to be held by the divine masculine. So there's so many men that are just seeking more. They're like, what is, I need it. Like, I have a greater purpose. What is it? I have deeper meaning. What is it? And our society does not initiate men like we did many, many, many moons ago. And a lot of our men are seeking purpose and healing, and they want to answer that call. So I see myself wanting to work with that in a bigger way as well.
Hmm.
And share how it plays out exactly right now.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, I agree, right? And I do feel the feminine rising, right? Like we're becoming more conscious to the patriarchal uh, programming and or models in the society, right? Like definitely in business,
Oh,
you know, like religion, right? Like I don't know any other patriarchal model that has been more prominent in this world's history than dogma and religious establishments. I feel like I'm excited about where this goes with the feminine power, right? Like the feminine energy, because it's all new to me, right? I can feel your energy when I speak to you. Like when we had our conversation and session, like I can feel it in you. And like I was just like totally taken back by I was just taken back by the presence of that, right? The what it's done to me, right? Like just how I'm integrating that into my life and seeing the changes, right? Like how we can integrate the feminine with the masculine and then what happens after that, right? Like it's so powerful. And that's the only word I can say for it, right? Like just because it's so unknown to me. It's so I'm not used to that, right? I'm just so used to being that warrior, right?
yeah.
And going out and, trying to triumph and tackle obstacles and fix things that rarely do I ever step back and step into my own power and step into the feminine and let go and be creative and be totally opposite of what I am. Right. And then through our session, it's like you almost kind of like you bring the unconscious to the conscious, right?
Mhm.
And then you're able to make decisions that way. Right. But how do we step more into that feminine?
So it's not really a matter of stepping into the feminine, because what the feminine and masculine energy, they're in you. They both already are in you. But it's your wounded masculine, that patriarchal masculine, that's not allowing that feminine to flow through you, because those are the stories of the feminine energy makes me weak. Or if I embody this feminine energy, I cannot be the warrior that protects. And that's not true. That's a story that you need to let go. And what happened for me is when I started healing my relationship with the feminine and embodying the feminine, my relationship with my inner masculine healed as well. It's this natural shift that happens when you step into that. It makes the space for the other one to heal. And I think that's the same for you. I think your focus isn't, I need to be more feminine. It's how do I embody the divine masculine, the healed masculine? And how do I just fully, because the divine masculine is that warrior part of you. It's the protector, it's the provider. And you want to fully trust that part to come out. And in a lot of ways, our society is kind of pushing that down. Like there's no place for that here, but that's not true. It's trusting that part of you to protect when necessary, to lead you when necessary. And then when you heal your relationship with the masculine, that sets the container within you for that feminine creativity, trust to flow within you. Does that make sense?
Feel like we're on a session, Melissa. We're in a session.
I figured it would kind of go there.
I
So,
know, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. How
mhm.
how do we heal though? Right? How do we heal past lives? Right? Like how do we heal that trauma that we discussed thus far and clear up some of those chakra centers?
Yeah. So for you, I know we talked about just that conscious awareness of like, this is not the lesson I meant to learn in this life. And for some, that's a simple of a release that needs to happen. It's just like when they feel that fear that they know is associated with that past life, just remembering my soul's already learned that lesson. And you also want to show gratitude for having learned that lesson. So when I did my past life healing, I really went through the release of that pain and then just the gratitude for what I went through in that lifetime. So I do not have to carry that anymore. And I can release having to learn the lesson in that way. And I think for a lot of people, it's just once you're aware of like, oh my God, that makes so much sense why I feel this way. And when I'm speaking to you about a past life, your body knows, like it resonates in your, it's like a knowing in your body, like, oh my, yes, like that makes sense to me. And again, once you have that awareness and understanding, I find with past lives that easily falls away and it no longer holds you back. And if you need a little bit more, I can do a more in-depth past life healing with you. But for many of my clients, it's just that like that conscious awareness and that release, like releasing that in meditation, like this is not for me in this lifetime. One of the ways I like to do it is like a journal. I'll kind of like affirm in a journal that like I've learned that lesson. I'm grateful for having learned that lesson. That is not my teacher this time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then when you get into a lot of what I see in my work as well is like programming picked up on in childhood. I know you've had Bruce Lipton on this podcast.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Huge fan of his work. And he talks about how we are programmed basically from the third month of pregnancy, the third trimester of pregnancy until about the age of 7, when our brain is in that theta brainwave state. We're just figuring out how to be a human, picking up the programming. That is harder to release. So if like you're kind of stuck and your energy stuck because of like the ways you picked up on how to be in the world when you were a young child, that takes more effort, more, I would say, like extended conscious healing. That's kind of where like I really need to you need a little bit more support over a longer length of time, where the soul you can just easily release and your soul's like, okay, yeah, we don't need to have that hold us back anymore, let's go.
How can we connect with like our guides more, right? Like how can we communicate, like build a relationship with them, like a two-way communication?
Yeah, so I first started connecting with my guides through journaling. I would have like the intention to connect with them and I would sit down with a pen and I would just like ask them a question, then I would start writing the answer and I would start to feel them come through me. And it takes getting used to because you feel ridiculous at first. And then it also takes the like letting go of control so they can write through you. You can connect with them in meditation. You can also ask for signs from them or ask like what kind of signs they're going to be giving you. I actually, one of the first times I connected with, I have a I have a guide who is a very, very evolved soul. I don't think he's incarnated for many, 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 many years. And he is like that divine masculine that holds a safe container for me to work within. He was the first one that I connected with because I felt his presence very strongly. And I asked, like, well, what is the sign when I know like you're with me when I need you? And the word I got from him was antelope. And I was like, this was like back in the beginning. And I was like, I'm obviously crazy and making this up. Like, what's going on? I didn't think about it for the longest time. And recently I was going through something very challenging. I was in a very tough spot and I was up at 4 a.m. I couldn't sleep. And I just picked up my phone. I was looking for something that would put me to sleep. And something on Spotify I'd never seen before came up. It was this app called Get Sleepy. And I pressed it and I touched a story it was going to tell me. And within the first 4 minutes, they said the word antelope like 3 times. And I was like, oh, here you are. I get it now. So again, it's like
Awesome.
that. Yeah, because I can't tell you how many times I felt ridiculous when I would do this, but it was just, I always chose to trust. Like, I know where I can get if I doubt myself. I know I could stop myself. I can keep myself from trying to do what I want to do. But if I just go into fully trusting what I'm going to get, let's just see what happens. And that's kind of that attitude that I brought to this, that approach, that curiosity, that just like when the self-doubt comes up, like put it to the side and just kind of say yes to whatever you're getting.
Say yes.
Yeah.
Ah, mm. Yeah, I think I'm right there with you, right? Like seeing that sign, right? Like, but synchronicities, right? Like I just had a conversation not too long ago about 444, right? Like in numbers, right? Is that to you, right? Like your understanding, is that the universe or source communicating with us, or is that just like what do those numbers mean?
I've seen them mean several things. So I have one of my friends. her guide communicates with her through the number 9. So I've seen it where like, and it really is when she's in a tough spot, she usually is always seeing the number 9. And then actually the other day I was driving and I was thinking about her, and then I saw like 999 and I was like, hey, I get it. And it could also be past loved ones. And then it can be a myriad of things, like really whatever you think it is usually what it is. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Usually we are much more intuitive than we give ourselves credit for. And what I see happen all the time is that like we get a sign, we get something like that, and then we feel like, oh, this is for me in some way. And then that conscious mind, the ego, talks you out of it. So it's really just kind of lengthening that space of time where you can feel that love, that vibration, whatever that message for you is meant to be, before that ego mind takes over and pulls you out of it.
That ego mind. Ugh,
We got to love the ego mind. It keeps us alive, but
it
got
does.
to know how to work with it.
It does. I mean, your ego mind. I mean, you had a career, like I'm in psychology, like going to school for it right now, right? Like I understand totally what your background is and how like people are very evidence based in their theories and philosophies, and then you totally pivot and go somewhere different, like totally off the range, right? Like on the margins. Like, how do you feel like inside doing this work as opposed to what you were doing?
I feel I am the happiest, most joy filled, radiant I've ever been. And I'm also the most loving of everyone in my life. Like, I've never been, because of this work, because a lot of my work is just like looking into your shadow, looking into how you think. And all of my sessions are just focused on you. Like, whatever your judgments are of somebody else, how are they actually about you? Like, what are you doing? And I've done that work on myself. So that's kind of how I know how to navigate those sessions. I am, and even my friends that don't believe in what I do, they comment on how I'm completely changed. I'm very happy. I'm very accepting. I'm very loving. And when I do have something kind of put me back into my pain body or like take me down, I move through it with much more grace, and I move through it much more quickly. And my career for 10 years, I was in child development research. I was very, very science-based. And in the past, I would say like the last 3 years of that, I felt the pull that I needed to shift, that shift was imminent. And what I see now, because I still have my scientific mind, and what I see now is that science was never meant to be separate from spirit. We've done a huge disservice by making it so. And there are studies like we've talked about, like with the children that are reincarnated, but also just how the power of prayer works to heal. Like we've had studies where hospital patients, when they're surrounded with prayer, they have better outcomes than ones that were not. They've always supposed, like we're supposed to work together. And I don't think you can understand the secrets of the universe like we try to in science without having spirituality. And what I'm seeing a lot in my work is I'm seeing the spiritual and the energetics of science, like a lot of with our childhood programming, like Bruce Lipton's work. I can see the energetics of that in my sessions when I'm getting like a lot of insights on generational trauma. I can see Dr. Mark Wolin, his work on It Doesn't Start With You, how he really talks about how like children of like he talks about children of Holocaust survivors or people that perish in the Holocaust carry that trauma with them still. And it's actually very evident in their DNA on a DNA level. So I see it as I have pivoted, but I'm still using that part of me just in a way that is more free to express. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, definitely makes sense.
Science Melissa is not gone. She's still there.
Well, I've been turned on recently to like Egypt, right? Like and the pyramids and a lot of the sacred geometry that's coming out of there. Have you done a lot of work? I know you have a priestess in you or something, right? Like, have you connected with ancient Egypt, like as far as like deciphering some of its mysteries? Like, does that interest you at all? Like any of that?
Yes, that very much interests me. And I would say in my work, I think I have an idea of how some of the things like the pyramids were built, but that's also very much shaped by others that I've heard talk about it. Like there's a gentleman, Matthias De Stefano. He remembers
Yep.
all of his past lives, and he talks about how like they moved the rocks through like changing the frequencies of sound. That's very similar to when I do a lot of my healing work, and when I go into meditation, I go into a healing temple, which is an Egyptian temple. I do that in the spirit realm, my mind's eye. And I do a lot of that with vibration and sound. And so I'm seeing how in my work, from what I've remembered, is kind of mirrored in these things that I'm hearing from people that are talking about at that time. I would love to get, I've always been fascinated by Egypt, even as a very young child, which I now understand is because I had this past life within me. That's something I would love to dive into more in the future. But right now, I wouldn't feel confident speaking to the mysteries of the universe based on what I'm seeing in my work. Does that make
Sure.
sense?
Yeah. No, I love his stuff, right? Because Matthias, I think that's how you say his name. He actually like speaks Atlantean, right? Like I've actually heard him sing a song
Yes.
in Atlantean, and he says he writes notes to himself in that language. I'm like, but I mean, I don't know. I don't know what that looks like, or if it's even accurate. Like he could just be scribbling down like different symbols, and I'd be like, oh, that's Atlantean. Oh, cool. I don't know. But
When I heard him sing that song, it was like a full body remembering. And then I saw a past life of my very close friend who was in Atlantis. And I immediately like, went to her and I shared that with her. So that is my like, that's my yes. It's like if my body is like this, it was just, it was a remembering at my core. And then I started getting those insights from my friend's past life about it as well.
wow.
Mhm.
Hmm. So your experience with ancient Egypt, right? Like, and the pyramids, I get it, right? Like, I don't know how much like not programming, but how much of I've listened to influences my meditations in that sense as well. But I feel like there is something for me that pushes me in that direction because it's like almost wanting to be remembered almost, right? Like,
Yeah.
like this character Thoth. I have no idea who this is, right? But I keep hearing about these tablets. I keep hearing about, I'm pulled towards people that have read these tablet books and are speaking about this sacred geometry and this and this and that. Um, Maybe it's because of the past life, right? Like that we've been associated with maybe in this time period or whatever, but like I don't know. Like there's a fascination with it. Is that your experience where people, when you become so fascinated with a subject, usually maybe it's correlated with a past life experience?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely a past life. You've had several past lives in Egypt, and it's all,
How do you know? Like you just pulled that out? Like you just like, or do you know that? Like,
no, yeah, you have.
oh
Um,
no, you have that, for sure. No, no.
okay. No, that's just, yeah, you've had several, and you were, because Egypt, that they talk about in archaeology, Egypt is much, much older, like much, much older. So you've had lifetimes where it goes way, way back, kind of where like Graham Hancock saying in that past civilization, I would say 11,000 to 12,000 years ago. And then you were also in Egypt like 2,000 years ago or so. And you've been high up in, I don't think they would call it nobility, but you've been very spiritually connected. And then you've also just kind of had like not really memorable, like just, you were just a
Yeah,
regular.
meaningful. Yeah,
Yeah, they were
like hanging out.
meaningful. They were your life, but they weren't like you've had some that have very much influenced you. Like I think you're being pulled to these teachings now because you've worked with them before. And it's a remembering in many ways what these teachings are saying to you. And that would be more associated with that powerful life, I would say 11,000 or so years ago.
Wow. Like when you remember those lives, right? Do you get like fresh, like past life memories into like your consciousness? Do you like, are you doing something and like washing the dishes or walking with the baby or doing something and then all of a sudden like a past life that you haven't like, encountered yet pops into into your vision?
Yeah, that's starting to happen to me more now. When I first started doing this, I would have to be in meditation to access them, but it's something that I'm in a situation where it's similar, something that will just like trigger the memory. For example, I was like, I don't really resonate with a lot of TV, but I was trying to have something on in the background while I was doing, I think I was washing the dishes actually. And I put this movie on called The Duchess. And I was looking at the credits, and then I just had this whole like thing come back to me of being part of the aristocracy and like the lessons that I learned in that. And that was actually very associated with somebody that I had had a soul contract with in this life. And by seeing that past life, I really understood our soul contract and how it unfolded in that way and how we were then able to release each other. So now that I am, because every day I'm in meditation, and I think it's because I'm so connected now, these things come to me more easily. And before I kind of had to put a lot more, quiet myself down in a lot more ways to receive them. But I'm also just very open to receive them now.
Hmm. How do you fulfill a contract? Is it just like having an experience with someone? Like you don't have to break their heart necessarily to fulfill a contract, right?
No, so you're contracted with your children, your wife, your family. Do you want me to give the example of the contract that I saw?
Sure.
So that was actually this man I had dated for 4 years. I dated him from 19 to 23. And we broke up because our lives were going a different direction, not because there wasn't love there. So that was a very hard breakup. And he actually called me Duchess. Like that was his nickname for me in that relationship. And when I saw this movie and I saw just like that title, and then I saw the woman walking, it came back to me that that past life was actually with him. And he was a duke, and I married him and I became a duchess. And we were married in that lifetime for 4 years, where we had a happy marriage. We were in love. And then after those 4 years, the marriage became very, very unhappy for a myriad of reasons. So we stayed married because of the time, but we died. We did not like each other. We were not in love. I was miserable in that life. So in this lifetime, what I realized when I saw that life and how those pieces click together, in this lifetime, we were contracted to come together for those 4 years. And then I had to break away from that and choose sovereignty, independence, self-fulfillment, because in that lifetime in the past, I didn't have that option. Women didn't have power. Like I couldn't just up and leave a duke and go get my own castle somewhere else. Like I was very bound to that. And part of the lessons were to choose our own paths and turn away from love. That's why in that soul contract we made before coming together is we're going to come together at this time. This is going to happen. And for our highest and greatest good, we need to part.
Hmm.
Because we could have, there was a path where we could have stayed together, but it would not have worked for either of us. For us to actually be on our most fulfilling paths, we had to part. And I actually remember, because I was only 23, I was very young. I remember being so sad. And my friend was like, well, go and get back together with him. Like, what are you doing? And just being like, no, like, I cannot, like, that's not for me. So that was that contract being fulfilled. I have a very powerful contract with my husband. He was actually one of the catalysts to like who I'm becoming, and me for him. We've transformed within this relationship together in beautiful ways. So sometimes contracts are meant to where you can have like a long, fulfilling relationship. Other times, a person is meant to come into your life to kind of change your past. That can be a very powerful negative experience or a very powerful positive experience. Does that make sense?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I feel like I've definitely had those moments in my life where someone definitely came in and was a catalyst for change, right? Are there smaller contracts as well, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, I'm assuming, right? If there's big contracts, there's got to be small contracts. Like
Yeah.
everyone in your like, and to your point, your example, right? Like with your boyfriend, like, is there a future probability that you would have stayed with him in this life, right? Or was that just like destiny for you guys to break up?
So it was when I see, like I was saying, like there was a path where we could have stayed together, but we would have exactly in that previous lifetime, we would have both made each other miserable. And we would have inevitably broken up because we would have kept making each other miserable. Like we weren't being together would have prevented us from doing what we were supposed to do. And we were both contracted to marry different people. So we would have inevitably had to break up to fulfill those other contracts. And I think if we stayed together like 5 or 6 years, they would have just been miserable years. because usually people break up when they've gotten to that point of like, we can't do this anymore. And for us, we did it before we got to that point. And
Mm.
that, I think, was like the power of the contract, was like, this time is up, part ways to reach your higher potentials, because it's not with each other.
Mm.
And then people come into your life, like you said, in smaller ways to just kind of like ricochet you onto a different path.
Push you maybe back on it, or like totally change your trajectory, like your path completely, right?
I would say that, like, yeah, kind of put you back on it, but usually if they're like coming in a very powerful way, it's because you've gotten off path. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
They're really here to kind of just like get you back over.
Do you
And
see your clients' paths? Do you, like, when you connect with them, right? Like, do you see, all right, man, like I see you're doing this, right? Like this is what you're here to do. And the probability, like, how much do you trust that information?
so when I see your path, I see it very much as like a tree branch. Like you kind of have that like main branch, but then I can see all these other ways in which it'll break off. And what I really try to do is I just try to like align you with the feelings and the know, like how you're going to know yourself that you're going to be on that path. Because if it's really your path, I can help shine some light so you can understand it, but that's really going to come from you and your heart and your soul. And it's just that I think I'm better serving you by just shining a little bit of light on how you feel when you're on it versus how you feel when you're off of it. Does that
Well, you used what is it? You called yourself a mirror during our session, right? Like you can be a mirror for me and shining that light. What does that mean? You can be a mirror. Like you're showing us the potential.
yeah, because I don't like to try to do the future predicting readings. Um, I can do it sometimes if I'm really strongly pulled to something, but I feel that I'm best serving you if I'm just shining a mirror or reflecting to you the ways in which you're getting in your own way. Because honestly, I can tell you what your path is, or I can help you realize what's keeping you stuck, where your energy needs to move, what thoughts are not serving you, what patterns are not serving you. And if you have an understanding of that and you break out of those, you're going to find your own path. And it's going to be that much more powerful because it was from you.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. So speaking to that power, right? Like what is your philosophy on what we truly are, right? Like we keep reincarnating, right? Like we keep making these contracts, we keep coming to this reality, but what is our true essence? What is our true identity?
Oh, you know, we are God, we are love, we are source consciousness that has the separation is an illusion that we are not separate from that. But we come here and we break off from that and we forget to have this experience so we can evolve. And I really think that we are God, source, the divine, whatever word you would like to use, evolving by understanding itself through us. So I really don't think we are separate in any way. Like you had asked me something about God consciousness in our session, and I was like,
Mhm.
you are God consciousness because you are the divine, you are source expressing itself through Trey at this moment. And it is so we can evolve. Like I very much think that the core of life is to evolve and change, which is why we see it throughout the universe. We see it throughout our planet. It's not to remain stagnant. And in that knowing, we come here to learn and have those lessons for our evolution, which is ultimately the evolution of the collective consciousness.
Mm, I love that. I know you got that fresh website. I could
I
I could
do.
talk to you all night. You definitely have to come back on, Melissa, because this just been so fun. Tell everyone where they can reach you and where they can reserve a session.
Yeah. So my website is solsticerising.com. Solstice has a lot of deep spiritual connotations, and the rising is, the rising consciousness of the collective and of you if you're checking out my site.
I love it. Melissa, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been fantastic.
This has been so fun.